So my spiritual longing began, I think, about a decade before meeting the Dharma. And it all started when I read this little book, The Wisdom of Thoreau. So most of this book includes quotes from his book, Walden, where he's describing his life of utter simplicity in a small, simple cabin on the shores of Walden Pond in Concord, Massachusetts. This was my grandfather's book, who received it as a gift in 1968, and I really treasured it. But I didn't understand the implications of what Thoreau was speaking about. At the time, as a teenager, I was really captivated by just the appearance, just the image of this solitary existence in the forest. So many years later, as I began to search YouTube, I found tiny houses. And I was again just so excited about this notion of simplicity. And so, I saw all these videos on YouTube of people building and designing small houses in the woods. And I started sketching. And so I have notebooks full of tiny house sketches. I was looking at property. I was trying to figure out, okay, where could I build my dream tiny house? I came very close to making some very bad real estate transactions. I was looking at this very small piece of property fairly close to the Abbey that had no legal access point. And I was convinced this was a great place to build a tiny house. Fortunately, I did not buy that piece of property. I also stayed at many tiny house Airbnbs. So I went to Canada one time and I was staying at this little tiny house in the woods. So just like, Thoreau. And I was completely dissatisfied. So not at all what Thoreau was talking about. Then I met the Dharma. Before this, I had met the Dharma, originally by reading Venerable Chodron's Open Heart, Clear Mind. And at that time, I was also watching YouTube videos of Theravada practitioners, so practitioners in the Thai forest tradition. And they were living in kutis. So I thought, living in a tiny house in the woods is a spiritual practice. They're doing it. So I got very excited, and then I started designing kutis. So then I had all these notebooks full of designs for kutis. So I did that for a while, and then I started designing portable meditation structures that could be assembled on the spot. I could carry them into the forest, so I wouldn't have to buy property. And this culminated with buying a used camping tarp at a sporting goods store, taking it to a forest outside of Newport, walking and finding a tree, setting down the tarp, and thinking, okay, now I'm going to meditate, just like those Theravada practitioners, under a tree for my day's abiding. Well, that lasted 5 minutes, because I started to see bugs on the tarp. I said, there's no way I can concentrate with bugs on the tarp. So clearly, this was not working out. So then I found chapter 8 of The Way of the Bodhisattva by Shanti Deva. And again, this image of simplicity in the forest comes up. So in verse 87, it says, "In caves, beneath the trees, in houses left abandoned, may we linger long as we might wish, relinquishing the pain of guarding our possessions. Let us live in freedom, unconfined by cares." And this again just really captivated my imagination. But I started to think there's more than just the appearance of simplicity. It's definitely deeper than that. And I started to think about how it relates to the conditions suitable to develop serenity. So 4 of those conditions directly related to what I had been dreaming about. A favorable place, being free from coarse desires and having few desires, a mind that is satisfied and content, and minimal involvement in the worldly activities. So these were things that Thoreau was talking about, things that these 2 guys on YouTube called the minimalists were talking about, not having so many possessions. But what really struck me was a quote I found in this book, which I studied during winter retreat. So this is Shantideva's other text, one he references in The Way of the Bodhisattva. So this is the training anthology, and it's a translation of the Shiksha Samuchaya. This translation's by Charles Goodman. And there's a chapter called In Praise of the Wilderness, which I believe is really the source material for chapter 8 in the Guide to a Bodhisattva's Way of Life. And there were 2 quotes in particular that just really hit home, that really, really synthesized these themes that I had been contemplating through the years. So it says, "For what purpose do I live in the wilderness? Merely living in the wilderness does not make someone a religious wanderer." Duh. But clearly I didn't know that for many, many years. "There are many who live here who are not trained, who are not peaceful, who are not guarded, who are not disciplined, who do not practice, who do not make effort. For example, deer, monkeys, flocks of birds, bandits, untouchables. They do not have the qualities of religious wanderers. But as for me, I should accomplish the goal for which I live in the wilderness. That is the goal of religious life." So all of my time craving this tiny house in the woods, thinking that then I'll be happy, right? When I have all of the external conditions perfect, just like I want it, designed by me to be totally simple, and yet my mind is dissatisfied. And there are many people who live in tiny houses in the woods that are not religious practitioners. They're not content necessarily. They're not satisfied necessarily. So then, further on in this same text, it says, "The term living in the wilderness means living free from attachment to anything, living with a mind that is highly trained by being very peaceful, living fearlessly, being satisfied with the bare necessities and having few desires, living in satisfaction." That hit me so hard this winter that I had been, holding this image, and it was really symbolic of this mind of contentment, which is what I want most of all. So I recognize that external simplicity has never been the cause of a contented mind, but that a mind of contentment can be manifest as external simplicity. That there's an appropriate time and place for a retreat in the woods, maybe one day. And that it really begins with giving up craving. So the thing that I had been doing in all of these notebooks for so long was just covetousness. It was just craving. And I was really clinging to this appearance of simplicity, the appearance of renunciation, the appearance of spiritual life, when really I wanted to develop the mind of simplicity, the the mind of renunciation, the mind of spiritual practice. A definition of simplicity that I found that I had put in my bathroom many years ago was the curation of only what has value. So it was that I had been in pursuit of this simplicity, but had totally misidentified what was truly valuable. It wasn't the tiny house. It wasn't necessarily the woods. So to bring it back to Thoreau, he said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." So I hope I have a little more understanding of that since I first read those words so many years ago. And what I've come to as the real purpose of simplicity is to make room for what is important. To get caught up in simplicity for the sake of simplicity's sake just takes a lot of time and doesn't actually lead to what is meaningful. So from now on, I hope to cultivate a mind that is unattached to things, a mind for which worldly things can drop away naturally, and a mind that is satisfied with whatever arises. And that way, no matter what my housing situation is, whether I live in a tiny house or not, whether I live alone or not, whether it's quiet or not, that I know I'll be then truly living a spiritual life.